All right, I'll jump in with a question.
Okay,
Is there
great,
actually
Nick.
is there actually a symbolic empty seat for me there on the panel, complete with a name card? Do I see that?
Certainly is. Yes, you are here in spirit, right? Or
That is awesome.
virtual you, right?
That is awesome.
Yes.
I'm gonna start demanding that at every meeting that I dial into.
Yes, yes, this is
First, I
great.
love it.
Okay. Well, I know, Nick, I'm going to ask you a question. It's not even on this list, but I'm thinking, what would be a question that you would anticipate that somebody could ask that you could just give them some general information about? Gee, what you do sounds really cool. How can I do that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think we can even frame that a little bit more specifically in terms of somebody asking a question like, hey, it sounds like you aren't really particularly a linguist in your job. How do you use linguistics in your career, or how did you wind up doing what you do given the nature of your education? And so I think that becomes a pretty broad question, and I'm not going to just kind of ramble on that for the duration of this panel. But I think that, for me, I wound up doing what I do in something of kind of a circuitous path, much like my path through grad school was a little bit circuitous. I joined my graduate program wanting to focus on minimalist syntax, and that kind of dropped by the wayside, and I studied syntax in various other forms, kind of moved on over towards semantics, and then kind of got interested in the cognitive aspects of meaning, and then started focusing on psycholinguistics for my PhD. When I first left grad school, my initial job was actually very squarely related to my dissertation research, more so than most people, I think, who enter the private sector are fortunate to have. My thesis in particular was on lexical semantics and sort of aspects of semantic processing, looking at the very early stages of semantic retrieval. When I started working at a branding firm, I was able to sort of reframe that as a certain type of expertise in the first impressions people experience when they see a word, which is basically what branding is all about. And so I got to spend a couple of years actually practically applying concepts that were very, very close to what I had actually studied. Over time, my career has kind of purposefully gotten less and less languagey. And I think that's okay too, because it's a good thing for our interests to evolve and for our experiences to compound. And I started grad school when I was 22. I'm 36. And I'm kind of glad that what I'm doing right now isn't overly beholden to my vision of my future when I was fresh out of college.
Great. Okay. Somebody, question. Yes, yes, good, we've got somebody. Yes. Perfect.
Dr. Chiang?
Yes.
I'd like to know how you combine linguistics with teaching a language, because from my personal experience, I know a lot of language teachers don't actually take any linguistic courses.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a good question. Can you guys hear me? So one of the things I think is cool about the way we do language teaching at Lango Institute is that it's very linguistic-y. As a product of the UNT Linguistics Department, during my master's, I also got the TESOL certification. Because while I was studying, I also needed a way to pay rent. So I taught English as a second language, got certified, and it's also a very lucrative field, right? But in my courses and in practice, you're right, not a lot of linguistics is applied aside from the TESOL knowledge. And so that's one thing we wanted to bring into language teaching pedagogy. Because I think it's important for our language learners to realize also linguistic patterns, right, in the language, and then also know about variation in the language, right? So what other forms they're going to encounter other than the sort of prescriptive grammatical rules, right? So yeah, we try to get very linguistic-y, and we try to make linguistics also very interesting and sexy for our students. And they really enjoy it. We draw attention to all kinds of cool patterns in the language. We even use the International Phonetic Alphabet. We use some linguistic-y terms, although we break them down. And yeah, we try to simplify those linguistic concepts and make it fun and learnable.
Great. Anybody else have another question?
I need my steps.
Come on. Oh, perfect.
I guess in general, like everybody asks me, what is linguistics? Why are you studying it? What are you going to do with it? And I almost feel grilled sometimes. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I enjoy language. I enjoy the foreign aspect, the foreign language aspect part of it. But I really don't have a good answer. Can you all help me with that?
Okay, who wants to start?
What is linguistics?
Right. Come on.
Yeah, how do you
So
explain it to a non-expert
So
audience?
broad.
Right?
How do you explain it to a non-expert? So there's actually a website that's something you're going home for Christmas vacation and your relatives are going to grill you like, why are you studying linguistics? Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
Well, it's not the same thing as being a polyglot, although it just so happens that many linguists know another language, right? And you're going to get that question a lot, right? So how many languages do you know, right? But linguistics basically looking at the patterns in language, right? Whatever variety that is, right? A scientific look at language, use, and also the forms, and then its meaning.
Okay. Anybody else want to join in?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Of course, there's different approaches to linguistics, and so some of them are more focused on things like how the brain works, and others are more interested in sort of observing language as a phenomenon in the world without any particular reference to how the brain works, So, of course, depending on your particular interest, you could explain it one way or the other. But, behind that question is often the sort of thing of like, well, what are you going to do with that and where are you going, right? And so I think, those questions, of course, don't just come to linguists. They come to people in, most any field of the liberal arts, right? And so this is really a question about getting a broad education that helps you to think critically and analytically in new ways, and to, also sort of learn to express yourself. I mean, for me, my background in linguistics helped me become more attuned to language and the way it's used. And so I like to think that I have a leg up in, say, explaining things to non-native speakers of English, because I have a sense of where they are likely to run into problems when understanding me and other native speakers. And so, I sometimes witness conversations where I can see like people not connecting right, and I know where they went wrong, because I know which slang term or which funny expression got in the way there, right? And so, I think we become attuned to those sorts of things studying language, and it's going to be useful in any line of work because you can potentially communicate more clearly. You might become a better writer and editor, and so these are going to help in most any line of work.
Okay, Mike, I was going to ask you to chime in because I know that recently we had some students, Alexis had some students working at Walmart.
Yeah.
So, and you're not a linguist,
No, I'm not.
but so how do linguists fit into what you do?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that a lot of technology companies are actually trying to figure out, or like Google and Microsoft and Amazon have actually already figured out that this is the new trend. Recently at Walmart, what we're realizing is that when we are looking at language, we've been looking at it wrong, in the sense that we're looking at the language in terms of a mathematician like me. And I have no idea how someone is feeling whenever they're talking, right? And one of the things that we realize so much is that for us to be able to do machine learning and teach machines and robots to talk or to interact with humans, we need to have kind of a good language understanding and also good language generation as well for the robot to be able to communicate with people. And one of the things that we are doing right now at Walmart is we are trying to build up teams whereby we can understand, can we use chatbots in a different way than what we've been using them for? For example, if someone is calling in like an employee from Walmart and is calling to find out about his or her own health benefits, the way they call in and talk to the agent, the intonation of language, the pattern of the language can tell a lot about how that employee is feeling. Is he agitated working for Walmart? Is he happy working for Walmart? And these are some of the things we're trying to tackle, or we're trying to scratch the surface for. Recently also at Walmart, we've realized that even reading legal documents that we've read for a long time, or we've hired people internally to read, there's a difference in actually reading those documents and interpreting them exactly what they're supposed to say. We've had actually 6 UNT students as annotation, and they're actually doing a lot of extracting of what those documents classifications are, and as well as looking at summarization of those documents so that we're able to feed this information back to the people working on these cases. So there's a lot of room for growth in linguistics. Actually, I wish I actually had a degree in linguistics.
It's never too late.
It will help me do my job better, for sure.
Right. Nick, would you like to chime in on that one?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I think also, I feel like we should probably find some time just to chat after this, because that's all super cool stuff, and like e-discovery is a really interesting space. But besides that, I think this is a really interesting question. I certainly got asked this a lot when I was a linguistics student, and before that when I was an English major. And I think that it's an interesting question to think about implicitly what is really being asked when someone asks me, oh, so you're studying linguistics, what are you going to do with that? There's an aspect of that that is, a parent or a relative or a friend saying, so what are you going to do for a career? What are you thinking about in terms of your job prospects? There's another aspect of that that may be more closely related to something that I think a lot of people who conduct basic research in the liberal arts and social sciences face, especially these days, which is, almost more of a thing of being kind of forced to legitimize the fact that we study what we study. And that's a tough one, right? Because on the one hand, I think being able to articulate the value of the knowledge that we accumulate is really important. And so, yeah, we should have an answer for that. On the other hand, sometimes it is a little bit intangible, at least on the surface. If you're studying natural language processing, you have a very clear story that you can articulate about how you're going to take that specific knowledge that you're learning and translate it into a robust set of career options. If you're a sociolinguist, or if you're working on language documentation, or you do anything of a theoretical nature, that's going to be a lot harder. You wind up in this sort of awkward position of having to tell a story about how, well, everybody uses language and communicates, and I have some degree of highly specialized knowledge in how people use language and communicate. And so surely that is of value to society. And while I think that's true, it doesn't feel like complete argumentation to me. And I don't have an answer here for you. I'm just here acknowledging that it's hard, right? And in a way that is not seeking to sort of undermine the value of these less directly applicable, sort of courses of study. But I do think it's important to think about what are the possible connections, what are the possible applications of what I do. When I got asked that question by family members, I think they were really just trying to see if I actually had a plan for my life. They wanted some reassurance that I was going to turn out okay and not come back home and live in the basement. For other people, I think they're more genuinely interested. Exactly what do you do with linguistics? For a long time, I was writing a blog about sort of what my experiences were like moving into the private sector. And it's still up. It's called PH Deli. I haven't written anything for it in a long time, but I'd love suggestions for other content. But one of the things that I wrote there was actually a very specific experience that I remember from time in grad school, where I, had a couple too many cocktails with this random business guy at a bar when a bunch of friends bailed on happy hour and I showed up anyway. And he was kind of antagonizing me about how I was going to get any value out of my career path. And I totally flubbed the conversation, and I didn't answer anything correctly. But, sort of thinking retrospectively on what I could have said and how I could have approached the interaction, I think proved worthwhile. And I think in general, though, yeah, there's a lot of value out there in the private sector indirectly for people who have linguistics training. I think a lot of what my fellow panelists have said is very true. I would add to that linguists are particularly good at bringing a particular variety of skepticism to the table. And when you're working with data-oriented work especially, you know, linguists are really good at asking questions like, hey, how representative is this data that we have access to? What are the limitations of our understanding?
Yeah.
I think that linguists are also really good at, you know, better than most at, you know, genuinely recognizing the true value of embracing human diversity and being inclusive of people from, you know, different backgrounds, people who are differently abled, people who have different communication styles or different, you know, types of just realities. And I think that as the world becomes more interconnected, you know, that it becomes more and more of a pressing need, you know, in businesses as elsewhere. You know, that still doesn't answer the question of what are you going to do with linguistics, but, you know, there is value there. And I think collectively our stories will eventually begin to form an answer to that question. You know, here are a bunch of ways in which people with linguistics backgrounds have actually made a mark that their background helped them to make. You know, therefore, you know, it seems plausible that, you know, you might be able to forge a similar path.
Great answer. Yes, Kevin.
So Nick talking about having a plan, you know, where people ask if you have a plan for your career, which is kind of reminding me of conversations I had with my parents when I was an undergrad, you know, like, we're not going to pay for you to major in Russian. I'm like, all right, I'll find a second major to go with it. And I kind of shopped around and like took lots of courses as you do as an undergrad. And then it's like, great, I'll add linguistics. Like that's going to be like much. but I mean, first, the sort of pressure was good because I really was thinking a lot about what I was going to do afterwards. Exploring opportunities and, you know, what sort of summer internships could I get and what were the career prospects and all of that. And I have to say that, you know, getting like part-time jobs, like while you're a student, trying out things is actually really important because, you know, you can shop around and take classes in different topics and see if you're interested in one topic more than another, but like actually trying something at a job and it makes it more concrete. Like, okay, what does it feel like to sit at a desk all day versus be on my feet all day versus managing a project or interacting with people, working alone. Like you start, those things all become much more concrete and you start to get a better feel for what sorts of work you want to do. So, I mean, I really highly recommend it if you haven't already done such things, depending where you are in your undergraduate or maybe master's, you know, careers. But I mean, it's really important to get some opportunities, trying some things, especially things that aren't so directly related to, say, linguistics, right? It really just helps you get a better feel for what you want to do, where you're going.
Good answers. Great answers. Yes, Mary's got a question.
I actually had a question for Kevin because linguistics recently joined the College of Information and my information science peers say the same thing. What is linguistics? These sorts of questions. But I was wondering what inspired your turn from linguistics to then get an MA in library science?
Right. So library information science is mostly a master's level program. There are very few undergraduate programs in it. It's kind of like a professional degree that you would get after studying anything. I didn't say go into undergrad thinking this is what I wanted to do, but while an undergraduate, I worked part-time at the Digital Humanities Center at the University of Maryland, where I went to school, and was getting interested in this use of technology and support of humanities research and things. And so was getting in this area and was busy like researching all the people I was encountering in this field and what they did in their background. And I discovered a number of them had degrees in library information science. So I thought, well, this is something interesting. I don't know, like I wasn't planning on being a librarian, but it'd be good to know how to use a library better. And this seems like just a good background that could be to have. And so I, went in that direction, got a master's degree. I went straight after undergrad. Many of my peers, there were some there who did that as well, but many of them had spent a few years doing something and then decided to go back to school and do this. And but when I went into library school, like I thought, okay, maybe I'll end up working in one of these digital humanities centers or in a consulting firm working in electronic publishing in this sort of area. Maybe in an academic library doing kind of metadata work. But then you just follow opportunities where they come up, right? And got this very peculiar job starting out as an electronic publishing librarian. I think it's the only time I've ever seen that job title. It kind of married my interests and put them together. So I was really just, again, kind of pursuing, following the path of what seemed interesting and where there seemed to be prospects for a job.
Yeah. Great. Yes, we have a question here.
So my question relates mostly to the language education side of things, because I was originally an education major before I decided to switch into linguistics, because I decided language teaching is really cool. So in what ways, I guess this is kind of a broad question, but in what ways would you recommend using the linguistic knowledge that you gain from this degree in an effective way while teaching? Because I think one thing that I would be nervous about is that I guess not everybody has I guess the same metalinguistic knowledge and capability. So while all of this information that I'm learning is great for me, and it totally makes sense for me, teaching that to somebody else might just make language frustrating and awful and the worst. So how do you end up merging the two without it being frustrating, or do you kind of get what I'm saying? Okay.
Yeah. Linguistics can seem intimidating, definitely, to language learners, especially when they're already trying to learn about, sort of the regular grammar rules and all the other complicated phenomena in a language to learn about. But I try to frame it as in linguistics being sort of an easier way to look at language, because by noticing linguistic patterns, right, you actually have an easier time, right, of internalizing those rules. Of course, there's exceptions. But yeah, we try to frame it as an easier and maybe more fun and fascinating way to look at language, right? And then kind of also discovering it, not just, becoming a competent speaker, but also learning more about how that language works as a whole. Yeah, great question. And I want to mention too, during my studies, master's studies here in linguistics, as I said, I was teaching English as a second language for extra income. But it was actually during that time when I got the opportunity to be a part of summer English camps here at UNT through UNT International, that it kind of melded for me, right, what my actual contribution can be to language teaching pedagogy, right? So in drawing attention to linguistic forms, at least participants of our summer programs had a lot of fun with it, right? We did things like fly swatter games to target different speech sounds in English, right? So in English, there's a lot of different vowel qualities, which makes it so complicated for language learners. And so teaching the IPA and for students to learn how to recognize symbol with that one sound, they had a lot of fun with it and actually found it easier later, right? And actually one of my students from that summer program is over here, and she came to several of them. Did that help thinking about it in a linguistic way? Did it help thinking about English pronunciation in a linguistic way? Yeah, it was funny.
Wait.
Well, I don't speak English very well, sorry, but yeah, well, I improved my English in that programs, in the summer programs, and Lisa made it funny because she uses play games and something like that with to improve our phonetics and pronunciation. Like she said, like the vowels and consonants. So it was really nice to be in that programs. I've been there for 3 or 4 years, I guess. So right now I speak better than the first time. So I think that if you use games or play in the teaching linguistics, is very helpful for people who doesn't speak your language or any language, and you want to know or learn how to speak. Is really helpful. So sorry.
I'd also like to turn it on the other way. And Lisa, maybe you can make a comment on how does that help the language teacher having a background in linguistics? Because like you said, you were in education, you moved to linguistics, but many of your peers have not done that. So they won't have that linguistic background. And so you should have a leg up. And so I want Lisa to comment on that. And then maybe I see a couple of people who teach at Lango, or at least one anyway, who may also make a comment about how the background in linguistics has helped him to be able to be a better language teacher?
Yeah, so actually I'm Korean American and I grew up here, but I was speaking Korean as a child, but then later in life, it became more important to me to know more Korean. So I relearned it, right? And those kind of patterns really spoke to me when I was relearning the language, especially in comparison to English, right? So it was only later that I discovered linguistics, and I was like, oh my gosh, this encapsulates everything I'm passionate about. But when I learned that you can sort of make sense of those linguistic patterns, right, in order to better learn the language, I think that's really, really helpful for language learners, right? So giving them linguistic tools to figure out how to go from a target language, or from their native language to a target language, is really helpful, right? So from a linguistic background, if you know that a speaker's native language is, for example, Korean, then I know there's certain sounds that don't exist in Korean, right? And I know what it takes to produce, more of an English approximation to that. Right? So knowing that really helps the learner, and not just saying like, no, that's wrong, right? Or no, you need to do it like this, right? That doesn't help the language learner get there, right? And I don't know, Tyler, if you want to add to that. Tyler teaches Chinese. He is a polyglot, true polyglot. He teaches Chinese, German, and French at Lingo.
And he's also a graduate of our master's program, right? You did the UT Austin undergraduate, correct? Yes, and then here for the master's.
So the question, if I'm right, is how is linguistics training useful to being a language teacher? Was
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's everything, man. Linguistics gives you the tools in just giving you labels for all the things that you encounter as the user, speaker of a language. So yeah, for some people it can be overwhelming, but I've never had someone complain that their brain was full when I was explaining the IPA to them or something like that. So I worry about that too. I wonder am I overloading them with all this jargon or stuff, but I haven't ever gotten that feedback.
In fact, our students are usually like, wow, that's so cool. When we point out the linguistic patterns going on, they're like, oh my gosh, I never realized that.
I mean,
I've just been told do this.
It certainly makes more sense than saying, well, that's just because that's the way you say it, right?
Yeah.
It sounds good, but nothing sounds good to a non-native speaker because the sound isn't native to them, so they wouldn't understand that as a native speaker would, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so having that, even if you don't overtly teach it, knowing what that is, and then recognizing the kinds of issues that students have coming to, say, whether it's the target language is English or some other language, you have that sort of in your toolkit, and you can pull that out if you need to, but you understand what's going on better than someone who has no background in, why things occur the way they do, and that language is systematic and makes patterns, and it's not, oh, it's just because it's just some irregular weird thing that English doesn't do this. No, you can't. For a learner, that doesn't help. That doesn't help you learn the language. If you think about your language learning experience in another language, you want to know why, right? Not burden you too much with the rules, but at least give you a way to understand them.
Yeah. If I could even chime in on that just right quick, I had an experience that was very relevant to that, because when I was an undergrad and I was starting to take linguistics, it was around the same time that I was in, I think, like my second year of studying Italian as just, an elective. And Italian has a lot of interesting morphosyntactic variation that English doesn't. The way that they form the past tense is with these like compound, auxiliary plus, past participle constructions. And it's one of these languages that has auxiliary selection. So, so I say, ho mangiato, like I have eaten, but I say sono arrivato, I am arrived. And that was seemingly really weird and arbitrary, and sort of taught as such that, there's just some verbs that you have to do this different thing with. And, never mind why, nobody knows why, it's the way it is, right? Memorize it, make yourself some flashcards. Spoiler alert, kids, don't make flashcards, they don't work. But around the same time, because I was studying linguistics, I was starting to learn about things like thematic roles. And I was starting to learn things about, syntactic structures and things like that. And, really what's being captured in this auxiliary selection pattern is something that several years later I would come to learn is basically called unaccusativity, and something that I ended up writing a master's thesis on. But being able to kind of think about, like was said, that these are, there's a lot of patterns in language, and it's actually very systematic for as weird and complex and arbitrary seeming as it is. And sometimes capturing those patterns really helps you generalize your knowledge faster as you learn. That, and I mean, just learning about the vowel space and learning about, phonetics was wildly helpful in improving pronunciation. And I think, for a linguist that takes a couple phonetics classes, you will at least have the advantage for the rest of your life of when you meet somebody whose name is unfamiliar to you because of their, linguistic or national background. You'll probably do a better job, pronouncing their name than the average person on the street. And people will frequently find that very gratifying, that you actually, kind of got it right. And, so that's nice.
Great. Do we have another question?
I actually.
Okay, Austin, you ask a question.
So one thing that I always wonder about as a graduate student myself is how fields intersect and emerging fields within a field. So can our panelists speak on maybe some emerging fields, some emerging trends, maybe ways that linguistics is starting to intersect with other disciplines that we might have not seen before that some of our students could be interested in?
So I'll try to take a stab on that. So I think one of the biggest trend in technology right now is computer science and language and linguistics. I think as of right now, we have a lot of people who know how to do computer science, know how to build machine learning algorithms, but they don't understand the space of English. And when they come to building knowledge graphs and things that can actually, or ontologies, they kind of fall flat because they don't understand how the English language, the syntactic, the semantics, and how they tie in together. So the beauty part of actually having linguists working in teams together with the computer scientists is one of the things is that they can actually be able to structure data correctly. And that this is a very important thing in technology, because if your data is wrong, everything else, whatever, no matter how brilliant your algorithm is, it's going to be wrong. So I see a big move even within Walmart. We're thinking of moving now. How do we get people who are computer linguists? Computational linguists is a big field right now, and it's very hot. And also AUC also in the sense that they also want people who actually can be able to direct teams of annotation, because a lot of the text data is actually unstructured data, and there are no specific labels, that's what we call them, of the data. So we need people tagging this data and having the machine go in, building an algorithm that can go in and look at the patterns like the human brain does, and actually being able to interpret them. So I think this tying, I think any kind of class setting in linguistics, actually, I talked to Dr. Palmer, and she gave me one of the linguist courses that are actually being taught, I think, starting in Frisco. And a lot of the machinists at our company actually wanted to do these classes because they say, well, at least I understand more about this than, because I have to teach every time since I took natural language processing in grad school, I go back and teach, and I say, I get so tired and fed up because so I rather have the profession to do it. So I have had like 2 or 3 engineers trying and actually wanting to go ahead and take these courses because they'll improve their work.
Yeah, very good. Lisa?
Yeah, I think speaking to my sociolinguist side and the research I've done, I'm really thankful for opportunities in linguistics in my courses too, where I got to take a really messy set of linguistic data and then quantify it. I think that's a really applicable skill for many different jobs. In sociolinguistics, there's a push toward quantitative research. Because of that, in my work with language variation, we quantify maybe some of the most messy linguistic data you can think of, which is perceptions of data. How do you quantify language attitudes? Yeah, perceptions of data, right? So we did this through mapping it with geographic information systems, and then we also did statistics using the data. So we were able to see really cool patterns visually with the geographic area, what people think about certain areas. Particularly, we worked in South Korea and in Texas. And I think half of you are my sociolinguistic students right now. So you guys also got a hands-on opportunity to do this in my class. So yeah, the skill set I got from quantifying data and doing statistics was really helpful for me in grad school, and then still in my research today.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that, you know, obviously in terms of the sort of where is linguistics being applied in other fields, I mean, you know, obviously in English language teaching, as we've been discussing, is a well-established one. Or recently, as we've just been discussing, it's the sort of natural language processing, computational linguistics, right? That these are the basis for things like machine learning or even artificial intelligence. So there's certainly lots of interest there. I mean, I've over the years heard of many computer scientists who say the most challenging problems for us to try to solve involve the messy data coming out of like fields in the humanities and language, right? That like it's not computationally interesting or sort of theoretically interesting on our end to try to work with like numerical data sets, right? Like there's just nothing interesting to solve there in that way, right? But that the real world has all sorts of interesting you know, data in it. And so there are certainly lots of problems here behind all of this, right? Yep. Of course, you say there's lots of annotation going on, right? There's lots of humans that need to be involved, right, behind all this. And you've been hearing it in the news as well, right? All these supposedly artificial intelligence algorithms and things really do have a lot of like human trainers and correctors and verifiers behind the scenes on them. But a lot of this does come back to principles that are in linguistics.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time to be in the field of linguistics, because for a long time, I mean, ever since the 70s, you know, from the 70s through the early 2000s, linguistics sort of established itself in many ways as an extremely insular field. Mm. You know, largely, I think, following on, you know, argumentation by Noam Chomsky and others, that, you know, kind of led to a radical adoption of the concept by many, not the entire field, but by many, that, you know, that language was something entirely unique unto itself, and that, you know, ought to be studied as such. Over the past 15 years or so, you know, I think the trumpets have blown and the walls are falling down around the field in some very exciting ways. You know, we are beginning to start to see much more interesting work happening at the intersection of linguistics and fields like psychology, computer science, sociology. You know, I mean, the connections with anthropology have always been there much more robustly than many other places. But what that means is that, for one thing, I think scholarship within the field of linguistics, especially on the theoretical side, is becoming better informed and more interesting. But also, I think it means that we're seeing more and more opportunities for application of the unique type of perspective and expertise that linguists develop outside of the field. And so I'm excited to see over the next 20 years how many more emerging areas for applying what it is that we know actually show up, you know, as the field begins to kind of extend its reach, you know, back across both academia and, you know, other realms of application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. Anybody else have a question?
I wanted to ask this.
Oh, good. Kind of linking back to the things we've been talking about, something, and this is sort of directed at Michael and Nick, but not, you know, to anyone's exclusion. So you both work in data science, right? And we hear a lot about data science, and it's this huge field with actually a lot of different things happening, right? So I wonder if you could say a little bit about, you know, how linguists potentially fit into data science, and how, you know, if I have a linguistics background, how could I position that? How could I talk about my skills in a way that, you know, say to a potential employer who's looking for a data scientist?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate to work in a couple of companies, and I've seen how diversity in a team can actually create a powerful team. One of the things that when I joined Walmart is we have different domains. We have computer vision, we have natural language processing, but in the field of natural language processing that apparently I ended up in, what I quickly realized is that all the stuff we've been doing, and at Walmart, we were doing it based on kind of objectively, and we're not looking at like the emotion behind language. We're not looking at the structure behind language, and this was very, very, I guess, kind of robotic, if I want to say. And like, for example, we had a project, I think last year, and the project was, we were looking at customer service calling in to express their frustration of an item they bought at one of the stores. And people were able to build models that can actually classify this customer is complaining, he wants a refund and all that. But more so, if there were things that came out of that, was there was a lot of emotion when the customers called in, which we never captured, because we never captured the way the language was communicated. So towards the end of that, so one of the things that we were tasked, like, can you figure out how to do it? And maybe not a linguist, I tried to figure out it in a computer scientist way, and I really quickly realized everything that I would actually build would actually fail. And then I was actually talking to one of the professors, I think Zara's professor. He was saying maybe you should try to look into linguistic department. And when I started talking to some of the linguists at UTD as well as here, I realized that a lot of the language has a lot of meaning, not just communication, but there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of weight. So one of the things that you can say is that when you're applying for a job like as a data scientist, what value can a linguist bring into the table? Yeah, they might not be the best coders, they might not be the best mathematicians, but they bring a set of tools that any kind of computer scientist don't have, and that's an understanding of language, and being able to critically and analytically analyze the language and actually give you a better result than actually using a machine just directly. And I think as of right now, one of the things we have two projects actually going parallel, and one of the things is that if they are successful, we'll be able to create maybe a team here with computer linguists as well as a machinist as well, working together. And I think this would actually be very strong, because we are not only attacking the problem as a data science, but you're attacking a problem objectively and looking at different structures of language. And I think that would be very powerful.
Great.
All right, yeah, I agree completely with that. And I think that my answer, my answer is a bit complimentary in some ways, because, I have the perspective on this from, quite frankly, dirty little secret. I'm not a linguist. I have a PhD in linguistics, but I sort of intentionally don't work with language data anymore. Turns out the better part, turns out over a decade of anything, can get boring. And, I've kind of turned my mind towards working with other sources of data. But, that's not to say that I'm not well served by the linguistics training that I had. And I think when we look at the world of data science, a data science role can manifest in a lot of different ways. Some of those may end up being working on, production engineering teams, possibly, with language technology. Many of them also aren't. My personal brand of data science is somewhat different. I work sort of more on the business analytics side of things. And so, I write some code, and it's okay if my code is bad, which is good for me. And I do some stats, and, they're not usually super, crazy complex stuff. And then half of my job, honestly, is in things like explaining bar charts to executives and, making, data is not inherently informative, right? Data is only useful and informative if it's properly understood and contextualized, and we shouldn't presuppose too much about people's ability to do that well. So when I think about if I'm talking to a linguist and I'm thinking about interviewing them, or if I'm interviewing them for a role that's kind of adjacent to what I do, what are some things about a linguistics background that definitely still matter, even if we're not working with language data at all? Taxonomy construction. Linguists are really good at taking complicated stuff that they aren't familiar with and organizing it into a structured way that helps actually scaffold building further understanding. I already mentioned the kind of skepticism thing, and I think the working with messy data is a theme that's already resonated throughout this panel. But it is a huge one, right? Working with messy and unstructured data is extremely important in industry in general. Linguists are really good at that. Evaluation. I think that linguists are really good at asking questions like, what are the counterexamples to the things that we're constructing? And how would we actually go about assessing whether the solution that we've built accounts well for the data? We are used to thinking about that in terms of, what violates our syntactic generalizations or whatever, but in terms of more broadly applied skill, really valuable. And then I think another one is that linguists, regardless of what our particular specialization is, we all kind of have drilled into us a really strong emphasis on like non-prescriptivism in how we approach language and how we approach communication, which means that we're inherently more tolerant than the average person exiting a humanities PhD when it comes to thinking about how we can encounter novel communicative scenarios and adapt to them in sort of a non-judgmental way. A lot of people who have academic backgrounds kind of don't like what it's like to wind up in an office setting and hearing people talking about learnings and actionability and synergy and things like that. It can be hard for people to sort of communicate effectively in those domains. But I think fostering that effective communication, especially communication around taking complicated topics and making them accessible to people who don't have expertise in that, is a critical component of what I do. And I think linguists, especially linguists that have experience teaching and TAing, really have a leg up on a lot of other people in terms of doing that. So at a more abstract level, there's a lot of applicability in terms of data science skills that I got from my time as a linguist.
And there's one thing I also want to point out, and I agree with that 100%. There's also a new field in language that is, I think, translation, right? Whereby people are trying to build systems whereby they can take language like English and maybe someone's interacting with the system in Spanish. So I think this is a very important part where linguists can actually add value because I think like where we speak in English, we kind of know our structure. If you go to the same thing in maybe in a different language like Spanish, I know that for myself because I'm from Kenya and I speak Swahili. The way I would communicate in Swahili is totally different the way I would communicate in English. But I think it's a translation of language from one point is also a good field whereby I think linguists actually play a great role because they are able to capture encapsulate everything that is captured in one language and try to preserve all that in a different language. I think this is a great skill set as well in system translations.
Mm-hmm. Question. Come on, go, yes. Over here. It's okay.
Hello, okay. I just had a question for Mr. Hawkins. I'm very interested in how you got to your position. It sounds very interesting, thanks.
Right, so I sort of told the first part of the story, right? So after library school, I got applied for this job at the University of Michigan Library. It was originally called Electronic Publishing Library, and this was in sort of the earliest times of libraries getting involved in work that's very similar to what university presses do. And so looking for someone, and because of the background I had in working with electronic text and XML format and such, I got in kind of straight out of library school. So it was a really great opportunity to kind of get going in that area. And so I spent 10 years at the University of Michigan Library, and that operation grew, and my role then evolved a bit. I was really running the operations of the scholarly publishing operation. And, but a lot of it was based on all the workflows around digital text and things. I came here and initially was just starting up the library's publishing operation here, kind of multiple in the experiences I had acquired at the University of Michigan. Since then, my role has grown into some other areas in this domain of scholarly communication, which is kind of library jargon, but it's about all the ways that researchers communicate with each other, right? Whether it's with writing journal articles or going to conferences or communicating on social media, and just understanding all of this and adapting to it. So, you know, there's some things that have gotten added on, like being the subject librarian for linguistics, like that was sort of like, sure, I can do that on the side. Like, it's just a small part of my job. I don't, as much as I love all of you, like there isn't that much to do in a week or a month, but you know, I do what I can, and it's great to be able to sort of keep a toe in what's going on for that, right? But in the end, it's really not a huge part of my job. So really, you know, yeah, I mean, it's, my role has certainly evolved over time. As always, you're thinking about what you want to do, where you're going, where the opportunities are, and pursuing that. But you know, I mean, it's one of the great things about being in academic libraries is that you often have opportunities to sort of stay engaged with an academic field, even if you are not like the subject librarian for the Department of X, right? So, you know, like my introduction alluded to me, you know, staying involved with some conferences around like Slavic linguistics and things like that, and engage with you know, Russian-speaking colleagues and things. And so, you know, one thing to think about, of course, is that if you have a love for language, you know, maybe there are things that you could be doing on the side in the future, right? Like teaching at a language school on a Saturday, right? Or maybe in some other career you manage to, you know, stay involved with people who speak that language in some other capacity, you know, even if in the end your work takes you a bit farther from linguistics. That there are lots of ways out there, I guess, to remain involved with the world of languages.
Great. We have another question. Yes, right here.
So this will be a bit of a general question, but I know that as we as a society have become more technologically integrated, and especially within the past few years, there's been an increasing popular need and want for better cybersecurity and privacy. So I was wondering, what are some of the applications of linguistics within the fields of, say, cybersecurity, national security, and like cryptography? Yes.
Well, so of course I'm by no means an expert in this, but a lot of what's going on in national security interests, of course, is involved in assessing threats coming from abroad, including by speakers of other languages, right? So in that classic narrow sense, you think of, you know, the CIA or whoever having on staff linguists, as they call them, though that essentially means people who read and or speak other languages, and can be monitoring that. But, you know, as we move into this kind of digital age and assessing threats, you know, like data online, you know, there's all sorts of work happening in the intelligence community where they are, you know, monitoring chatter in other languages. And, you know, you don't have a person sitting there reading everything, right? You're using computers to do this. You are detecting keywords or sentiment, right? Just like what you were talking about. Are people upset on these recordings of phone interactions? You know, trying to understand what's going on here. And so once again, there's a lot of linguistics that underlies all of this. Certainly, if this is an interest, I think, I bet there are opportunities out there.
So yeah, I agree with that 100%. One of the things I think I can give a good example is typically I think every other month we do get an email from our cybersecurity department, and what they're trying to trick us, so that if we open that email, then we're gonna get dinged a point, right? So and they're very annoying because they'll give you these taglines, and you really were excited to open the email, and you get this like, yeah, we got you. We are at risk. But I think one of the things I think they're trying to learn, and I'm not sure because I don't work in this team, is there a way of identifying risk emails or kind of flaws in code, for example. Based on how people write code or based on where people like, if you look at a Russian coder, they might have their own different tactics in coding that American coders don't, I don't know, that might exist. So some of these things are actually being looked at. I know language is most important whenever we're looking at spam email, where we have people, the way they construct English sentences, we're able to know if this is a spam email or it's a legitimate email. So I guess linguists there can actually play a role in kind of deciphering and that kind of thread, like categorizing those texts correctly. I also think in terms of actually linguistic in a national security sense, I think their understanding of other people, the way they speak in language and how they use language and what language is, like for example, if you're a dignitary traveling in a different country, able to understand that the way they're using language and understanding how they're using language to communicate to you as a foreigner is very important, because I think just by looking at people's way of using language and their body expression, you can learn a lot about people. So I don't know if that answers the question. It was a hard question.
Yeah, so I mean, so I'm not an expert in national security or cryptography, but I think what really stood out to me about the previous answer there was something that I also deal with frequently, which is getting these, you know, kind of company issued, you know, sort of phishing test emails that try to keep us on our toes about reporting, you know, suspicious emails. What's interesting to me about that is just what it tells us about possible exploit paths when it comes to actually sort of, you know, accessing sensitive information and breaking security. Compute power has gotten to the point now that encryption standards that used to be pretty robust, like RSA encryption, are starting to weaken, right? Because the factorization problems involved used to basically be intractable, and now they're quite tractable. And so now we start seeing like emergence of like new new versions of RSA encryption standards that are based on like elliptical curve dynamics and things like that, right? That's not really a linguistics problem and hasn't been for some time. But also the fact of the matter is that there are far less information security breaches obtained via brute force dehashing of passwords than there are about exploiting the weakest link in most of these chains, which is people. And so when we think about how easy it is to get a person to divulge sensitive information, maybe it's a password, maybe it's information that can often be used as a password, like the name of children and pets, right? Fragmentary social security numbers, right? Email addresses, things like this. You know, these are relatively easy to harvest from people at scale. And sometimes combined with other information that's been obtained by a data breach or things like that can be the missing link into actually being able to take over somebody's identity. And so I think that that often does become very much a sort of linguistic problem, because how are we, you know, how do we spot, you know, malicious attempts to impersonate a trusted party? And how can we train people to recognize that better? How can we automatically detect that better? You know, depending on who you are, how can we do that better? You know, all of those I think become interesting possible areas of study.
So I have a couple of advising colleagues here, and something that maybe in appointments that we always get from students is like, okay, what's the next course to take? Like, just they want us to throw out an elective. So were there courses maybe from your previous degrees that you wish you would have taken, or maybe you did take a course in it and now in your careers you think, oh, I really wish I would have done more with that? Yeah.
I will say any courses that have had a project component were really beneficial to me, because it gave me that hands-on experience. For example, in my sociolinguistics class with Trisha, it was more project-based, and that paper actually turned into the start of my master's research. So anything where you can get started on the way to helping you do that next step with your degree be helpful. A research method class that I took was so helpful too in learning how to write scholarly, which I hadn't learned before. And then statistics classes, which I was really lacking at the time in my linguistics classes. That supplement really also helped me just get the basics of learning how to quantify data.
In library school, I took a course in information retrieval, and it didn't have any real particular reference, say, to computational linguistics, but in fact, the approaches in these fields are very similar and kind of the same thing in certain ways. And it was really helped me think about things a lot differently. And I have to say that in my career in libraries and just sort of following developments in technology, search engine technology, whatever the case may be, I keep running into these concepts, right? That underlies all sorts of technology, and it helps me understand a lot of things. And so I think it's a course worth taking, or something worth studying a bit at some point. Of course, I'd also recommend dabbling a bit in computer programming if you've never done that. Maybe you haven't, thought particularly about going in that direction, but if you've never tried it, I think it is worth doing, because I think the things that people tend to find interesting about linguistics tend to also be found in computer languages, and that you may find it's interesting. And if it's a direction you'd want to go in, it opens all sorts of new opportunities for you, even without like changing a major to computer science, right? Like there's all sorts of boot camps out there for people who already have an undergrad in something else and change directions. I know lots of people who end up starting in something else and end up working as a developer at some point because they get up to speed with this. It's, not something that you necessarily need to have like a full major in, but trying that out, I think is worth doing if you've never dabbled in it.
I also want to say, if you're taking courses in linguistics and you're interested in teaching language, the TESOL certificate is a wonderful idea. You can also make some money teaching while you're in school, right? But it also opens up a whole lot of doors, not just here in the United States, but abroad too, for teaching language. I'm so glad, looking back, that I took those 4 classes to get the certification, because it really led to bigger opportunities.
Yeah, so I brought the linguistic pamphlet here because I got it last time. So it's funny because Jung and Kevin here have said exactly some of the things that I usually tell people who are from doing computer linguistics to take, like statistics classes, so that you know how to measure your models, and like information retrieval, if you're kind of building like recommender systems, these things that you should know. But I think what I regret not taking in school is I see linguistic phonology, corpus linguistic, and semantics, and pragmatism, is that what you call it? Sorry, pragmatics. I think these are very important, and especially when you're trying to build ontologies, I think these are really, really good cases, and even building chatbots. I think these are good courses to take. I think you'll not be wrong doing any kind of natural language processing class if it's offered. Basically, what you're looking at is basically processing text. You know all the language already. You know what the nouns are, the verbs are. But kind of looking at natural language processing, and it kind of breaks it out into tree structures, and kind of know how those tree structures interact with each other. That would be really good, because a lot of my work sometimes is kind of building this and kind of hashing them in a graph, so that we can be able to retrieve them much quicker. In terms of computer science, I think there's a lot of online classwork. I think Coursera and Udemy has done a great job. I would probably start there if the paying tuition for doing programming is expensive. And then if you really think you need more like concrete theoretical knowledge, and take a computer science class, which is teaching, I would recommend those data structures, because data structures teach you how to store data and retrieve data real quickly. If you can do that, that would be great. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I have to, of course, as the other data scientist in the room, have to second the previous recommendations that learning some stats is a really valuable thing to do. And gaining at least some basic coding knowledge is a really valuable thing to do. I'm not a very good coder, but the even sort of relatively basic understanding of Python that I emerged from grad school with saved my ass on the job market, quite frankly. And so, you know, non-zero is a very relevant amount of knowledge to have when it comes to that stuff. Because often getting over the initial knowledge hurdle of understanding how to do this, you know, you can really kind of teach yourself a lot once you understand the basics, if you apply yourself. So there's now the second part of my answer, which is, as quickly as is comfortable, decouple yourself from the assumption that classes are required as a means of absorbing in-depth and advanced knowledge. It will save you a lot of really unpleasant interactions with your advisor, where you are trying to justify taking electives when you should be working on your thesis. And it will open up a realm of possibilities for you to develop interests in things and go to the library, where I don't know if you realize this, but there's actually people who work at the library that can help you find the information that you need just because you're interested in a topic. And it turns out that, you know, they're like, you know, in addition to the internet, there are these entire buildings like full of these like awesome books that tell you all kinds of cool things, and you can learn from them by reading and by talking to people. And so I think that this is really valuable for me because I'm not a linguist anymore, but I'm still passionate about linguistics. I'm also passionate about photography. I'm also passionate about public health and how we can employ principles from cognitive science to help improve some public health initiatives, right? So you can continue to learn and grow and develop interests and even expertise, you know, outside of the classes that you take, and that's great. Finally, take the time by either classes or by just, you know, self-research to develop a really good grounded sense of the intellectual history of your discipline. Alexis Palmer and I both studied under a professor when we were back in grad school together, who had been around in the field for many decades. And she was wonderful in a number of ways, but possibly the greatest was the amount of perspective that she brought in our conversations to how unoriginal most of our ideas were compared to very similar things that had been said back in the 60s and forgotten in some lost journal article that she remembered, but not enough people did. And thinking at a very sort of holistic macro sense, how the ways of thinking about important topics in your field evolve, but also don't, and how persistent the really difficult underlying questions are, will give you a sense of perspective on your work and your field that is extremely valuable, and will also really help you just have a more grounded ability to talk about why what you do matters when you're speaking to people outside of the field. So it's not something you'll get assigned, but it is extremely worth your time.
Yeah. So remember that you can learn outside of course. Right? You don't have to take a course here. You can attend a conference. You can attend a workshop. You can find any opportunity to allow you and get in touch with specialists, researchers. You don't know, I mean, based on my experience, you don't learn all this inside the class, but you have it.
I want to real quick second the suggestion to talk to mentors in the field. That really helped me in my graduate school career and still today. So the linguistic faculty is a great resource for help. They have a wealth of experience. Trisha has helped me a lot in my own career, even pushing me to do conferences. And once I got there, she introduced me to everyone in the field. So that really went a long way, right? And helping me talk to people who are doing the work. And then, yeah, talk to your professors in classes. They're willing to help you. I know a lot of you are doing projects already, capstone projects, and you're working with someone in the linguistics department to mentor you. And yeah, ask for help. They can give you advice, and you'll get those answers quicker, right? And they can save you some trouble of searching around in the dark for what to do.
And also, in general, I mean, feel free to reach out to people even outside of the academic world who are in a line of work that you're interested in, or who's on the line of academic work like me, you know, like people are always flattered to be asked to tell more about themselves and what they do and how they got there. And, you know, go meet someone for coffee or something. I mean, it helps you do an informational interview, right? I mean, it can seem scary to do that kind of cold outreach, but I think it's a good opportunity to learn a lot.
Hi, I'm an undergrad academic advisor, and so I have a lot of students that will come and ask me, so should I consider getting a master's in linguistics, and what kinds of doors would that open for me? So what would you say to a student if they asked you, you know, is it worth going forward and getting your master's degree, or can I get a good job with just the bachelor's or something like that?
Well, this depends in part on what you were looking to do, and the first person may not know yet for sure. I think in general, I think staying in school because you don't know what else to do is generally not the best thing. Because I think you're just delaying having to think harder about this or find out more or discover more, right? You know, I think, you know, to sort of get that first full-time job, of course, if you know, someone who has a master's degree in any field is probably going to be looked at a little more favorably than someone who has a bachelor's degree in any field. So in that sense, maybe it's worth it. But I'm not sure that the premium there is that great. I think having some additional work experience, right? Having, you know, yeah, some sort of part-time or summer work experience, whatever, while in school doing something else, I think my sense is that's actually more important to employers. I mean, certainly when we're hiring jobs in libraries, you know, we're librarians, even sort of people we expect more or less out of school, we really want them to have like 1 or 2 years of experience in some fashion already. So we're hoping they got that while they were in library school.
I'm going to make an argument for the master's degree in linguistics, especially if you can get some experience while you're in grad school. There's a grad track program in the UNT Linguistics department that allows you to kind of skip forward in that process to make it a lot shorter. But in terms of what I do now, I didn't feel ready with just a bachelor's in linguistics. I think the grad school experience really helped me connect everything, like what I wanted to do, as well as get really concrete basis of linguistic skills and knowledge about language. And so, yeah, I advocate for the master's and even the PhD if you are so inclined or passionate to do that. Now I know it's expensive too, so I also encourage you to look at teaching fellow opportunities or scholarships. And I know that the department has some of those as well. So any programs that allow you to get the experience at the same time or help you with those costs, yeah, grab those opportunities.
I would say, but yeah, absolutely, you should go for your master's. But at this hands, I think I was almost changing my mind. I think it depends. I think what Jung is saying is spot on. I think try to figure out what you want to do, which means working in the field for a couple of years to kind of figure out what you want. If you really know that you want to go academia, go ahead and just get it done and out of the way. Personal experience is that I actually left school after my bachelor's, and I worked for about 2.5 years as an actuary, and I realized very quickly I hated it. So I decided to go back to school. So the thing is that I would recommend before you finish your bachelor's, get a internship, get a part-time job, try to see if you can get work in the field that you're learning. Because most of the questions are going to be answered real quickly after working 3 months in a job, and you're like, I really don't want to do that, right? but that will help you kind of open the door whereby you know what you really want to do. And then after that, if you feel that you're not sure after you finish your bachelor's, I would say, or even your third or fourth year, I would say just go ahead and talk to your advisor and see if you can do a master's for 1 year or 1.5 years. The reason why I'm saying this is because I think when I'm looking at resumes for people we're hiring, the first thing I look at is education, especially for people who don't have a lot of experience. And I would actually weigh people with a master's more preference, give them first preference before, as opposed to a bachelor's. And there's a reason behind is that they've had more training in this area, and that's just what it is. And we have a lot of master's people. So if we have masters and PhDs, I'll start with the PhDs first, and then give first preference and masters. So if you had to ask me, I'll say go for PhD if you can.
I think I think all the perspectives that have been voiced are valid. I think mine would be, it depends really heavily on what you intend to study and what you intend to do. I think a terminal master's for the sake of indulging your intellectual curiosity and preventing yourself from dealing with the impending reality of leaving school is an extremely poor idea, almost full stop. But there's a lot of caveats here, right? First of all, I'm a person who did exactly that because I had no idea what to do as I graduated with like a 3.1 GPA in English from a very non-prestigious university and had no marketable job skills. And I applied to 9 graduate programs and I only got into 1, and it was on a provisional master's track. So, you know, I can't necessarily say that I stand here as an example of why it's a bad idea, but, you know, it should be approached with caution, right? Especially now compared to in the early 2000s, there's just a lot more opportunities to learn those types of marketable skills without appeal to a degree program. I think if you're going to pursue a master's with the sense that you're going to stop at the master's, you've got to approach that from a perspective of, okay, how is this actually going to improve my ability to get a job that is the type of job that I would want or might want? So I think in the linguistics field, if you do a master's on an NLP-oriented topic, and that's the direction you want to go in, then that's great, right? That's going to improve your application, you know, visibility. It's going to improve your starting salary, and it's going to give you hands-on experience that's genuinely valuable. I think similarly, there are an increasing, you know, as we see academia change in response to industry demands and just other realities, you know, we start seeing more and more kind of professional master's programs coming up at universities that are genuinely interesting. I mean, you know, master's degrees in data science and analytics being one of them. I think getting a master's degree to satisfy your intellectual curiosity more generally, though, is a great idea, right? But why does that have to happen immediately after the bachelor's, right? Your interests will continue to develop as time goes on. And if you decide that you really want to pursue a topic in depth enough to study it for 2 years, you can find that time in the future if you want to go down that road. But I think that in terms of your, you know, financial future and your professional trajectory, you know, you can only kick the can down the road for so far.
Great. Well, I think that we're going to close the question period now, so you can have an opportunity to grab some food, and also to, which I don't know what's over there, but I see chips, and that's where I'm headed. And then also, so you can talk one-on-one with the panelists, although I don't know how we're going to do that with Nick, but I guess you could just stare at the screen and or talk to his empty chair.
Yeah. So the camera is actually kind of facing more or less down the table of panelists. So if you want to talk to me,
you can go over there.
Yeah, and I'll sort of be looming over your shoulder, Wizard of Oz style.
Yeah, you could sit in his chair maybe and then say, and so so that'll give you an opportunity in there, and I know that they're more than happy to talk with you. So at this point, I'm about to turn it over to Austin, but before I do that, I want to thank you all for coming, and especially thank our panelists for taking time out of their work schedule to come and meet with us today. So let's give them a round of applause. And one last plug for the Masters in Linguistics. If you're just remotely thinking about it, right? the best thing to do is talk to one of your linguistics faculty, one of your professors, and just say, look, this is what I want to do. What do you think? And, you know, we're happy to talk. Or, yeah, we can talk about, Lisa mentioned the grad track. And Dr. Capitangiani, who's sitting in the back here, is our graduate advisor. And so you may not be in graduate school, but if she can answer questions about the graduate program for you, so you can get in touch with her about that. Yes, and go.
I also want to mention real quick, Lango Institute is hiring for a Spanish instructor. We're also looking for interns for Spanish and Japanese. So if you're interested, please come talk to me.
Ah, and she's got business cards and pamphlets and yeah. So anyway, thanks again, and let me turn it over. Oh yeah, Alexis.
If you are interested in the computational linguistics track, I would be the person.
Yes, this is, you all probably know, Dr. Alexis Palmer, and here she is. And is anybody else here? Yeah. Well, I'm going to put a plug in for socio. I know it's not as lucrative financially, but it sure is interesting. And you get to talk to a lot of people. But I'll tell you what, I bet it's probably good in the computational field as well, because you're talking about understanding what's going on behind what people say, right? And so, yeah, we're pretty good observers of what's going on when people are having conversations. So.
It's also essential for language teaching.
Yeah. It's just everywhere. Anyway, thanks a lot, and
thank you.
Turn it over to Austin.
Yes, so I just wanted to say some things and some closing remarks. I want to thank our panel again for taking time out of your day to come answer some questions. We really appreciate it. I want to thank, yes. I also want to give a shout out to some of my Code Series colleagues who help make these things possible. Adam has helped with all of our equipment and tech and getting Nick here live. So that's fantastic. And yes, thank you. And we have Ava who helps with our marketing and getting you guys to come. So thank you so much for all that you do. And Kaylee helps me plan these things and actually make them come to life. And so I really appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Yeah.
And of course, thank all of you. There's so many people here. I am so happy. And so with just the turnout that we got, this makes more events like this possible, more panels, more workshops and webinars and everything. So thank you guys for coming, and I'll applaud you. And as they have said, if you have questions about the programs, about classes, about linguistics, we have your panelists here. They're here at least until 2, so use up that time. We also have some academic advisors. We have the grad advisor here. We have a representative from the Career Center. Lori, put your hand up. There you go. Yes, and then also we have food. Please get food and then come socialize and talk with everybody. And again, thank you so much for coming.
Hi. Yeah, let me give you a card. A lot of interest in Japanese, but
I'm getting a bunch of those ones just on top of regular.
I can give you some advice about. Talk to me about Oh yeah, Japanese.
If anybody wants to talk to Nick, I have this microphone, so you can use that to talk to Nick. Okay, after your food. Thanks for coming again.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we can keep you here for a bit, or if you need to go.
No, I'm perfectly fine hanging out.
Okay, they're getting food, so hopefully we'll get some people coming up here soon.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Okay.
At the end of it all, I think
Thank you guys as well. Okay.
What like goes into like the actual
You can sit in on the
I mean, I think there's there are a number of adjuncts at Lisa, right? So, and I think they've got something like, I saw the numbers at some point. I think every year, somewhere 20, 30, 40 people graduate with linguistics. So,
Are you talking to me in the KC hat?
Oh. What? Oh.
Kansas City hat. Are you trying to talk to me?
I think Austin has the microphone.
I'd be really interested. I don't think I'd be.
I wanted to. Yeah. Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
That's not less awkward.
So he can hear from right here. Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can you nod your head and say yes? Oh,
yes.
You can hear me. Okay.
So I can only ask yes, no questions. Great.
So let's set it up right here, and let's see if we can.
And then is there a way to make Canvas a bit louder?
Okay, let's see. There she is. Okay.
It's the future.
Yeah, and it's a very awkward future.
And then can we turn him up a little bit?
Turn him up. Let's see.
Okay, let's try. Can you say something, Nick?
Hey, can you hear me now?
Can you hear him okay? I know it's a little loud in here.
I can't hear. I'm so
No, you're
sorry.
Okay. Hold it all the way down.
Oh, all the way down.
Oh, okay. Let's see here. Can you see me typing?
I can hear you a little bit now.
I'll tell you what.
Cool. Hey, so if anybody can hear me, there is also a typing chat function on here. But if there's a keyboard, could maybe be used instead of voices.
I don't know.
Here, hold on. Let me get scared away. All right. Okay, give it another try. Can you talk again?
Hey, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
All right.
Hot damn. All right.
So you get to talk to the side of my head, I guess.
Yeah. All right. No, that's fair enough. Easy enough. Thanks for coming today. How are you?
I'm all right.
What's your name?
I'm actually an undergrad with linguistics, and I'm going to graduate next semester. And I'm sort of in the position where I'm trying to decide if I want to go and get a master's in computational linguistics or just try and go into the workforce directly.
Cool.
So you seem like somebody who would have useful experience to talk to maybe help me decide whether or not I'm going to do that.
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, I mean, Alexis Palmer is an old friend of mine, and she's awesome. So I totally endorse, studying with her. And I think it would be a good experience just on those grounds. But why don't you tell me a little bit more about, what your background is like? What have you been studying? What are your interests? Why do you want to get a master's in computational linguistics? Stuff like that.
Well, see, that's kind of what the problem is where I don't know what I like and what I don't like and what I want to do. But I did take Intro to Computational Linguistics with Alexis last semester. And I did enjoy that immensely.
Cool.
And I'm actually going to be participating in the data science and information retrieval research, undergraduate research this summer.
Awesome.
So I'm also sort of like directing in that direction. But I'm just trying to get
as much information as I can from potentially as many varied sources as I can.
Yeah. So what, in terms of your like kind of skills and experience background, you know, where are you at in terms of your experience with like coding and other stuff like that? I think that's probably one part of the answer to this question.
Okay. Thank you, I guess.
No, I mean, so I'm asking you, right? Like what is your background like in terms of your experience with like coding and programming and things like that?
I had 1 semester of Intro to Computational Linguistics.
Okay.
That's the entirety of my coding background.
Okay, cool. So here's what I would say. I would say that I think that in a case like this, yeah, maybe pursuing a master's in computational linguistics is a cool idea. You know, I think that, you know, it's good to have some hands-on instruction, getting experience with just the technical nuts and bolts, as well as some firsthand experience with some of the sort of, you know, important topics in the field. I think that in addition to that, there's a lot of resources available that you can use proactively to start building those skills. You know, online courses and other types of tutorials, and even really just working on your own independent projects, just trying to build stuff. You know, the best general advice for people who are trying to get into the data science field and other types of coding oriented fields is, you know, just start building shit. Like, just find something that's interesting and find a data set that you think is cool, and just do stuff with it, right? Like, it'll be a learning experience, right? And so that's good too. For data science, you know, hiring's getting pretty tough. Having a good story that you can tell about your background in terms of what you've studied and where your expertise lies and what helps you stand out, you know, that's going to help you if you go down that path. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
I'm very sorry, but I don't know how to gracefully eject myself from this conversation.
Oh, it's okay. If you just take like 2 steps backwards, you're going to be out of frame for me, and it's like you're not there anymore.
It's the orb is on me. No, I was right there and I was talking. The orb is looking at me, and I think I will just.
Yeah, it's an L. You don't like me.
Wait, how's this set up? Nick, wait, how does this work?
Tenuously.
I can see you right there.
Okay, but I can't look at him at the same time as I'm talking to him.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to say thanks. That was awesome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed being here.
Yeah, and I also saw you over here by yourself, so I thought I'd come hang out for a bit.
Thanks for coming and hanging out with me. It's like, not only do I not have any chips, but
I know, it's pretty, actually the university's queso is pretty good too.
God damn it, I missed you.
Have
There's
people
there's like no fucking queso on the West Coast. It's terrible.
seriously?
Seriously.
That's
Dude, like, no, we even have an Alamo Draft House out here, and somehow their queso is shit. Like, I don't know, man. It's sad.
You know, actually, there's a draft house here now too, and the food is just not good. It's just not the same as it used to be.
Yeah. Who would have thought that becoming a massively popular national chain would undercut some of the charm?
Imagine
of
that.
a hometown favorite?
Also, I really thank you for the memory of Carlotta too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That was really. I had forgotten about that, but you're right. She did exactly that.
Yeah. She was one of the most gracefully dismissive people that I have ever known.
Seriously. Yeah, seriously. I mean, grace is exactly the word. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to. I'm not going to stay here too long because I want to be available for students and stuff.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I would really, seriously, I'd love to like Skype sometime and just catch up.
Yeah, let's do that.
For real.
Yeah, for sure. I'm free a lot. I don't actually work very hard. So let me know when a good time is for you.
I couldn't hear that actually.
Oh, yeah, no problem. I'm just saying I have a lot of free time. So let me know when
Okay.
it's good for you.
All right. Okay, cool. Basically, after classes are over, it'll get a lot easier.
Cool. I'll look forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much for doing this. It was great. It was excellent.
You bet. Bye.
Bye.